actually finished two books today. One was an audio book, which I finished on the drive home, and the other, well, I'll talk about the other one later. So the audio book was called The Affinities, as you will probably have already guessed from the thumbnail that will be on the entrance to the video, though I haven't done that part yet. So The Affinities was written by Robert Charles Wilson, an American author whose books I haven't read before. His genre is described as science fiction. The Affinities was apparently nominated for a significant award. What was that award? I did have that up here anyway. It was nominated for an award. It might have been the Sundance, not sure. An adult award. It's very much an adult book. When I started it, I was really, really impressed. I absolutely loved the beginning of it. Having finished it, I'm less overall impressed by the totality of the book, and that's sort of the picture I want to get across. But when I first started reading, when I was in the first few pages, maybe the first couple of chapters, the note I made was, wow, the central concept is incredibly seductive. And that is still true. I absolutely loved the beginning. It's science fiction in the social dynamic sense. It's speculative fiction, but only just. Because the concept behind the Affinities is that a teleodynamic, I think is the word he uses, system of mathematical equation has been developed that can separate people into groups that have an affinity with each other. Randomly, he named them after letters, and I think it was the Abyssinian alphabet. So you've got taus, and you've got hets, and you've got a few others that I don't really remember too well. It's a concept that is one small step perhaps in the future, because we already have social modelling methodologies. There's ones that are used in business a lot, which INTP, etc. I can't remember what the system's called. There have been systems of that sort around for a very long time. They haven't been used socially as much, but they can be. So it's basically taking a concept that exists one small step into the future, which I like. Now, to backtrack a little bit, this review is going to be full of spoilers. If you think you're going to read it and you don't want spoilers, maybe just don't watch this review. The spoilers are going to pile in more heavily at the end. So when I say I enjoyed this book a lot when I started, that's true. I absolutely loved it, but by the end, I didn't. And it felt to me like there were two definite manifestations of this book, and in the first part was really strong, and the second one became very weak and often unengaging. In order to explain how that's the case, I have to spoiler it. And, well, normally in a review I would strive to give pros and cons on a book, but give the cons first, so end on a high note with the pros. But I can't do this here, because I can't explain what upset and disappointed me about the book without telling you about what I loved. So here's what I love. It starts with young Adam Fisk. He's in Canada, Toronto, studying art of some kind in what you guys call college, but we would call university. He comes from some small Midwest town. It's very much a stereotypical background, heavily patriarchal father. If the boys aren't made in his own image, he sort of disowns them, and he sort of disowned Adam Fisk because Adam didn't want to study business class, and he doesn't want to work in the family hardware store. He wants to study art, and he wants to get the hell out of that small town he belongs to. We're on his side. His father's basically that kind of emotionally abusive and detached type father that is stereotypical for families, patriarchal, a bit misogynistic. The stepmother leads a horrible life, but familiar to readers probably from all around the world. I know that rural Australia has their share, as well as rural America, or in this case rural Canada. So we start with Adam Fisk. He's studying art at university in Toronto. His grandmother dies. His grandmother is the one who's always supported him and is supporting him financially through this degree, which his father refuses to contribute toward because he's not studying what his father approves of. Adam Fisk in Toronto is incredibly lonely. He doesn't have a strong personality, he hasn't made any friends, and one day he decides to take the suite of tests that are being advertised for the affinities to see if he qualifies to belong to an affinity. So the affinities are marketed as social groups. An affinity includes a whole heap of different characteristics, biases, behaviours that will mean that everyone who shares those characteristics will form an automatic social group. And he's attracted to that because he's lonely. Now he takes the tests, he passes them, and he gets qualified into one of the largest affinities, and it's known as Tau. So he goes to this house and he suddenly finds that he's got this huge collective of people that he likes, who like and understand him. He's welcomed into the fold, and he has this honeymoon period where all of a sudden he has a real family, he has real friends, he has a place in the world. And humans are social animals, so all of that makes sense. And in this early part of the novel, we are in the kind of wow phase right along with Adam Fisk. Because I certainly was, because I love speculative fiction, a future society, and the social dynamic has always been something that's very much attracted me to science fiction. Now, I never particularly liked Adam Fisk himself. He's an ineffective main character. He's kind of a null void character, and the narrator very much portrayed him as such. I think if I'd have been reading it, I'd have been able to inject some enthusiasm, some emotion, some character into Adam that really wasn't there in the text of the book. And the narrator was very true to the text of the book, so Adam Fisk seemed kind of null and void. The early part, when he's joining the affinity and the affinities are explained, that was brilliant. It became less brilliant in the next part, because having set up the affinities are kind of dropped for the last part of the book, or they become a slight deus ex machina that get Adam out of financial difficulty or out of a situation. But the affinity stops becoming a characteristic and it becomes a background. And then we get into this thriller type motif. So, spoilers start heavy here. You are warned. It starts talking about the politics. There's a little bit of world politics, and eventually Mumbai and Pakistan are bombed and bad things happen. Whatever, that's a bit science fiction-y as well. But Adam Fisk rises in the Tau organization. He becomes a negotiator because his skill is negotiating with non-Taus, which apparently many Taus can't manage. And as this progresses, Adam Fisk as a character doesn't. So the novel The Affinities seems to span at least 1 decade period between when Adam is still in university or college, and then at the end, when the final apex of the thrillery stuff happens, a 10-year period where a person has no development whatsoever. So that's where Adam Fisk as a character seems like this hole in the plot around which the plot happens. I mean, that can work. It works for the first part of the plot just fine because he's such a null character that you can understand how, while going to an art college, he still manages to make no friends or make any useful contacts. In every other sense, that wouldn't make any sense, but with Adam being so ineffectual, yeah, maybe. Now, having worked for Tau for this decade, and he's now this negotiator, he negotiates with other affinities where necessary, and negotiates with non-affinity characters as well, still seems identical to the impoverished student we first met, but never mind that. Now, all of a sudden, we hit the thriller stage. There's a lot of politics between the different affinities. There's the bad guy affinities. They're the theta? I know that their symbol is like a square split down the middle like an old sash window. Anyway, that. I'm pretty sure it's that, maybe. The other bad guy affinity, they're militaristic, they're hierarchical. They're described as having had violent interactions with the Taos in the past, and they're trying to control a political bill that's being put through that will limit Tau and other affinities' ability to do affinity stuff, like have businesses and stuff. Because by now, Tau is a large organization. It's developed many businesses, financial support systems, healthcare systems that are for Taos alone, and they've gotten into some trouble for that, and that is apparently why the bill is being introduced. This is shaky ground. I live in Australia where we've got private hospitals and public hospitals. If you front up to a private hospital with no private healthcare, then you're going to be warned. You're going to be paying a lot of money for the care because it's for private patients. If this law works here, I can't see why it wouldn't in Canada or America or anywhere else in the world. Club services are a real thing. If Tau and the other affinities are a club, or they register as a club, then there's nothing to stop them from providing club services for club members. At least I can't see why there would be any problem with that. And unless you explain to me why there's a problem, I thought that was shaky ground. I thought it was very shaky ground. I couldn't see any reason why this bill would be hard to circumvent. Now, we've got this big thing. Tau want to prevent the bill from going through, so Adam has to go back to his dysfunctional family in whoop whoop small town stereotype land in order to convince his ex-girlfriend to testify against his brother, who's now going to vote for this bill. And it felt like we'd gone from being speculative fiction across science fiction to being purely a thriller. And the thriller part didn't work. Small things all the way through didn't work as a thriller. Adam's sitting guard on the street in case the bad guy rolled by, but he's not checking the back of the house. How does that make sense? Heaps and heaps of small things didn't make sense. And one of the big ones that never made any sense is why the bad guys were bad guys. It was never really explained why Tau was so inimical to the Hets. So the Hets are militaristic and they're trying to take control. Tau like leading by association, so they're the good guys and the other ones are the bad guys. But there's really no explanation for why they should be so inimical. So setting them up as good guys and bad guys fails in that regard. Now, right at the end of the novel, you can maybe see why he set it up so weakly, because he was trying to set us up for the end, but instead it all got lost into this bit of a blah, warring factions of humanity, and not done particularly believably well. So yeah, that was the second pass, and you're running around, and I just, honestly, I was listening because I wanted to finish it, not because I cared what happened. You couldn't care too much about Adam Fisk. He's too much of a null character. And the thriller was too unbelievably vague and inconsistent for me to care. And then the bombshell drops at the end. This is total spoiler. I didn't see it coming, possibly because I didn't care enough. No, I didn't see it coming because it wasn't telegraphed. It was meant to be a bombshell. Right at the end, Adam's half-brother, who he likes, but he sometimes ignores, I don't know, he's being giddy. What's with that name, hey? Giddy? Geddy? I don't know, is it a shortened version of Gideon? Giddy? I couldn't quite tell what he was saying. It's a weird name, whatever it is. Anyway, he has been kidnapped by the bad guy affinity and held in this house. And the Taos in town evolve this scheme to rescue him, only the lights have gone out and the phones have gone down because of some bombing off in Mumbai, so they're on their own, they're acting within their own little cell group without any orders from above. When the phones turn on for a second, Adam gets the order to abort, but he doesn't pass that on to the rest of the team, so they go in and save Giddy Geddy. After that happens, Adam is basically shunned by the Tau community. No one will return his calls. As soon as someone hears that it's him, they hang up. It feels like you can't belong to a social group for over a decade and not know that shunning exists. So that all seemed very weird, and the reader or the listener has to assume that he's being shunned because he disobeyed orders, but Tau aren't that militaristic organization, so none of that makes any sense. And we go round and round in this, none of this makes any sense for a while, before we find out, shock, horror, Adam was a Tau, but he drifted. And now he isn't a Tau anymore. His last test showed it, but the Tau leaders hid that information from him and the rest of the organization so they could continue to use him to blackmail his sister-in-law into giving evidence against his brother. So you can see a little bit before that the author is setting up the Affinities as all being a bit bad guys when he introduces some character who's Giddy Geddy's girlfriend, who a whole heap of people that don't qualify for any of the Affinities have got together and they've made their own little teleometric scheme so that anyone can belong, because Affinities are bad. I don't know what you're doing there, Robert Charles Wilson, but you've spent the first part of the book convincing us how lovely it is. Now, Rebecca goes on this little ranty rant about how the Affinities are good if you belong to one of them, but if you are, you're in this little garden, in a wall garden, and you're keeping the entire rest of the world out. But what about the rest of the world? It can't be truly good. It can't be evolution unless it includes the rest of the world, or everyone can be included. It's like, hello, real world much? There's nothing that includes the whole world. All clubs, all groups, all families have us and them. The Affinities aren't actually any different from, I don't know, the local book club. You've got us and them, people who read and people who don't. The local kindergarten mothers group, you've got people with kids and people who don't have. Us and them is humanity. It just is. And so going from the Affinities are good because they provide a family and a supportive environment for the people who belong, and they aren't actually inimical to the people who don't belong, they just don't get involved with them very much. That's a pretty good goal if you ask me. So we go from that to the Affinities aren't really that good because not everyone's allowed in. It's like, and Rebecca puts this argument forward, and Adam null and void Fisk just sits there and takes it and goes, okay, wow, that's true, yeah, okay. It's like, it's not! You've been a negotiator for 10 years. That argument is a primary school argument, debating team-wise. You can negate that. Anyone can. But Robert Charles Wilson, author of The Affinities, doesn't. He allows that to be the thing. Okay, so I've gone from the Affinities are good to the Affinities aren't so good for all of humanity to Adam Fisk being shunned because he did a thing that they didn't like, only he wasn't a Tau and no one had told them, so they're the bad guys now too. I mean, I can see it. No, I can't see. You obviously had something in your head about how this plot was going to work, but I don't think it does. I liked the first bit, which was about the Affinities and the possibility of social development in the future. I didn't like the thriller. Stick to your day job. Thrillers aren't your thing. And the ending was just messy. It was like a really old egg, and when you crack it over the fry pan, it just goes like splattery, watery, nasty, and you have to throw it out. I didn't get the ending. It made no sense. But the shining glory of the ending is, after Adam Fisk has been thrown out of his affinity and he's wandering around and he's all lonely and miserable, because that's where he was when he started the book. When he had no affinity, he was lonely and miserable. 10 years have done nothing for his psyche and done nothing for his ability to be not miserable and make friends, apparently. All of a sudden, Rebecca gives him a link to a new testing thing. It isn't the affinities, it's the new Butte telemetry that isn't an affinity but is testing in the same way. And off he goes to meet his next social group. This is presented to us as being, the world is new and young and beautiful and there's a future and it's hopeful. It's like, no, it's not. This is the exact same cycle you went through 10 years ago. So we can expect in a few years for them to be shunning you for no good reason as well. It's like, is that meant to be the conclusion? Is it meant to be that the world is entirely futile and social groups are never going to support you and you should give up? It doesn't feel like that. It feels like he's trying to write the ending in a positive, hopeful, future-looking way. I don't think it works. I don't think it works. This isn't the worst ending of a book I've ever read, but as a whole, as a complete story, I don't feel that it holds together very well. I think there was a hint there that Tao is described as utopian, and we all know that utopian only means at first and then it comes bad. This book was close to being a great book. The affinity part of it was great. I found it overall disappointing. Most of it was... the most I could give this was 3 out of 5 stars, really. And that's more for its potential rather than its actuality. And now I'm going to stop talking about the affinities because it's deeply disappointing residues being left in my mind from the story. I suspect I'm going to forget it fast. This review, however, will help me to not forget it fast. And if you've read this book, I would like to know if you're one of the 5-star people or one of the 2-star people, because Goodreads shows me that there's plenty of both out there.